Thanks very much. I'm just going to share something with you a little bit personal. I might start slurring my speech. In fact, I spent the night last night in a delivery suite with my niece, who's at the moment giving birth to a baby boy. So I'm a little bit tired, but I'm here. But philosophically thinking, I thought she's about to give birth to a little boy, and I wonder what kind of world he's going to grow up in. I wonder what it'll be like when he's my age, when he's about 40 something. And we do reflect on that, but when you see inspiring stories, like the one that we've just seen from William, it's actually incredibly inspiring, and it gives one a real sense of hope. And as Kieran said earlier, we want something to say yes to, not no. Everybody wants something to say yes to, and surely that's how we should be moving forward. And again, reflecting upon that, I think the theme of what I'm going to talk to you about, the theme of the converging world and what sits behind it, is actually, it's getting practitioners together to act. Less talk and more action, because everybody wants to enable and empower something that's positive and hopeful. And really, it started with a practitioner who was born just behind the M Shed. And actually, this whole area of Bristol was, in fact, his playground. It started... I haven't learned how to use this because I came in late. Let me just, there. With a man called John Ponton. He'd probably leave the back of the room at the moment because he's a very modest man, but he is a practitioner. And he took a leap of faith a few years ago, back in 2004. He was part of the RSA organisation, and the RSA was started about 6 years ago by somebody called William Shipley. And members of the RSA, the reason why it started is because William Shipley, he was part of these sort of people who had lots of money, and they had these Covent Garden coffee house conversations that were started. And they said, we're making lots of money, but there are kids going up chimneys, sweeping them and dying. Surely we should be putting our money to better use. And so the RSA was sponsored by a coffee house, a famous branded coffee house, to have these coffee house conversations on the 250th anniversary of the RSA. And they then challenged some of the RSA members to actually take on the role of William Shipley. And John did that. He said, I'll do it for Bristol. So coffee house conversations started around Bristol in 2004. And in fact, what happened was his local village just over the hill here in Chew-Magna said, we've heard that you're having these conversations in Bristol area about how to go zero, how to actually do something positive. And so, in fact, what happened was the village there said, come and talk to us, come and work alongside us, because we'd like to do something positive like that as well. So in 2004, in Chew-Magna, there was a lot of attention around the fact that they were trying to go zero everything, with energy, with waste, etc., etc. And so these groups would actually gather in the village hall, and they would have conversations about what they could do. And in fact, it was during those conversations they invited someone, an organisation that was quite young then, called Climate Care, which is quite famous now, owned by a big bank called JP Morgan, and which is interesting also. However, they brought them in, and what these people were saying was, you know, you can actually go zero, you can reduce your carbon, but you don't have to do it here. In fact, you can do it overseas, and you can actually put in light bulbs in townships in South Africa, and you're still saving the same amount of carbon at a fraction of the cost. Nothing wrong with that. And then people start to say, well, hang on, but don't people in our area need help? There are people here that suffer from fuel poverty, so why don't we do something here? And then, in fact, someone in the room said, well, what's the point anyway? Because when you look at China and when you look at India, what's the point in putting in a few light bulbs? We're not going to compete against that. So at that point, everybody could have just gone home and said, well, why bother? But remember, the theme of this is about practitioners. So actually what happened was John and someone called Ian got together, and they said, well, why don't we find a community in India or China, and why don't we tackle this together? We can tackle sustainability together. We can't just walk away from this. So John and Ian, John then said, okay, well, let's find one. And they did. They found a community in India. So off John went to India, and he met, in a roundabout way, he met somebody called Cletus Babu, who runs an organisation called SCAD. It's an NGO, and they work with more than 500 villages, and they work on all sorts of community programmes and social programmes. And John went to visit some of these, and what he found was that it wasn't that you could see that these Indian villages and these Indian people were running away in some kind of frenzy, hedonistically, towards some kind of hell-bent on destroying the planet. In fact, what you find is that many people that are struggling with water resources, with simple access to affordable and consistent nutrition and food, and even livelihoods and education. And it was while he was there that he also saw that it was a very windy place. And in fact, there were lots of wind turbines. So John had an idea. He said, why don't we put wind turbines in India, and then we can sell the electricity, and we can use the funds to actually fund communities in India and communities in the UK to twin on sustainable development. So we become an us community. So the Bristol community and the community in India could work together and tackle the issues around sustainable development and particularly climate change. So he came back, and he actually then met up again with Ian from True Magna. And together they created this theory, this theoretical concept called the Converging World. And the reason it's called the Converging World is because what they recognised in all of this was that, you know, if everybody lived like we do in the UK, we would need 3 planets. Okay? But we only have one. And so actually what we need to do is to try and converge towards a one-planet living. And you can't do that in the village of True Magna. Because they're right, what's the point in just doing it there? But you don't give up. You actually then try and find another community to work with, and you work on these things together, because these are actually global problems. But if we have lots of local solutions, but work together and raise awareness around what they are, then actually we can go somewhere together. If you look at this, the ecological footprint, this is based on 2007 data, because the data is always a little bit behind. But it's quite frightening when we see that if you're the average American, if everybody lived like we do, like the average American, we would need 5 planets. And if everybody lived like we do in the UK around the world, then we'd need 3 planets. And of course, that's just completely unsustainable. So does that mean that we say no to those developing countries? Of course it doesn't. What it means is that what we can do by twinning on sustainable development, we can contract our use of resources here, but improve our quality of life, whilst allowing the communities in India and other places around the world to develop, but to develop sustainably and to leapfrog some of the mistakes that we've made in our consumer society. So when we talk about zero growth, actually what we're talking about is actually spreading the wealth so that we can't continue on this trajectory of growth, as Kieran said earlier. The world just will not sustain it. Talking about practitioners, I've been a member of the Institute of Environmental Managers, and I had a colleague of mine who, you have to pass a test to get into this, an examination, and she was asked the question, why should a banker be bothered about the extinction of a newt? And she was a geographer, not an environmental scientist, so she couldn't answer it. But the simple question, the simple answer is because there is no economy on a dead planet. We need the ecological systems to create wealth, but then we need to distribute that wealth in a way that gives everybody equal access to resources. So on that principle then, we can't continue in the, on the growth trajectory. We just cannot do it. It's not sustainable. And this is the bad news. And I don't like to focus on that too much, but it's the reason, it's the purpose for us to be. It is the purpose why we exist. 75% of the world's forests have already been eliminated. More than 200 oceanic dead zones are already present. 30% of the world's arable land have been lost in the last 40 years. And CO2, the scientists believe that the safe limit for CO2 is 350 parts per million. We're already at 380, and it will continue to grow. Even if we stopped every tonne of CO2 emission today, we would still feel the impact of climate change. And it's the people in developing countries that are suffering more. So when I go to India, I do see the impacts of climate change already. So it is happening. Now at that point, just a few here. The other key things is that water, for example, is a real issue in India. From 1947 to 2002, the average water availability has actually declined by almost 70%. Now, that's very serious. So, when you hear the argument, why should we bother when India and China are on this trajectory? We need something to say yes to. We need to say yes, as Kieran was saying, we need to say yes to supporting any projects that help alleviate these problems. It doesn't matter where in the world it is. It's no good being too parochial, because if we're too parochial, we'll still end up in the same place. So we could either panic, or we could actually feel terribly, terribly sort of constrained and not want to do anything, not know what to do, because the problem is far too big. But we need more practitioners. Look at what William did. And then, this is really what the Converging World is about. So what we're doing is we're thinking globally, but acting locally. And it doesn't matter how small those steps are. And what we want to do is empower other people to do the same. So it doesn't really matter whether it's the Bristol pound, whether it's 80 pence for a tree. It's about actually acting. I sometimes think the academic system forces a lot of people down an academic route, and we're all used to writing very good essays and actually quoting from plagiarizing from lots of literature. We've all done it. But actually what it's not rolling out are the practitioners that we need to actually be the change. And so we need more and more practitioners. So at the Converging World, I hope that we can actually help people to act. And that's what we do both here and in India. So what was John's big idea? Because it's taken a long time for me to get back to this. His idea was to actually raise money where money could be found, in the West usually, in the form of donations. And those donations would be invested into wind turbines. And then those wind turbines would generate electricity that would be sold to the electricity board, state electricity board in India. And the money that would come back would be shared in three ways. Some would go to the Indian communities to actually help with environmental and social projects. Some would actually be distributed back to the UK communities to help them contract their use of resources, improve their quality of life, but also to do environmental and social projects. And some would be reinvested into more wind turbines, so the model would grow. So eventually we would increase the surpluses. And in 2008, that dream became a reality, and the first 1.5 megawatt wind turbine started turning. And in September, the second 1.5 megawatt wind turbine started turning. And to date, those two wind turbines have generated over 18 million kilowatt hours of clean energy, has avoided over 16,000 tonnes of CO2 emissions, and has delivered projects both in India and in the UK. But we're urgent, because in India, for example, the access to energy is becoming worse, and for the poorer people, even worse. There's a large population who don't have access to energy, and a lot of people still cook with open wood, for example. So we're trialling some wood stoves at the moment, and to help these people improve their health impacts, but also to actually use fuel more sustainably and to stay away from kerosene. And we're looking at village-scale renewable energy, small-scale wind turbines and solar power. The donation route in this economic climate is not very fast. It's not fast enough. We've seen some of those statistics there, and we need to get moving more quickly. So what we've actually done is we've looked at actually raising investment by way of loans. And this is very innovative, because we want to compete with the Comparos and the Indian Energy that are out there. But the difference is we're not going to distribute our funds back to the banks and back to the individuals. We want to do it to communities so that we can make a difference. So through BuzzBank, this is a social place for any enterprise that wants to raise funds. And basically, they offer people the opportunity to loan in money for as little as £5 for an interest rate. So we've not campaigned on the donations anymore. We're looking at how we can crowd fundraise through BuzzBank to allow other people to invest in the future and in the planet and get their money back. And this is quite innovative. So every action counts and there is no plan B. And we have to be empowered. And so we're looking for lots of different ways in which people can engage, whether it's 80 pence for a tree or £5 or volunteering. And we have lots of volunteers that come through. But what we do know is that by working with communities, there's a lot of people out there with a lot of hope already. And we just have to try and harness that and deliver and focus that energy. There was a man who had a dream. Wrong man. There was a man who had a dream. And he played in the Bristol area, and he's still in the Bristol area, and he still has a dream of twinning sustainable development between a community here in Bristol and a community in India, and to actually continue to act and to change. The purpose of an alarm is a call for action. And I said about the practitioners, hope is a verb with its sleeves rolled up. And so we do need more practitioners and we do need hope, but let's not just have it on the paper, let's get it off the page and we can all join in and be a global citizen just like John. Thank you.